Mr. Patterson?
This was the biggest, highest mountain for me with respect so far to the analysis and the hope that this connects somehow with greenhouse gas. I've done a little bit of review here. It looks like the Pavley renewable standards are anticipating 31 million metric tons of reduction. Energy efficiency programs, 26 million metric tons. High-speed rail looks to reduce 1 million metric tons. So the fundamental question here is, why in the world are we spending a third so much of the cap and trade money? Why are we spending so much to get so little GHG reduction? When you start comparing the price and the amount, the other methodologies and the other places we could spend cap and trade money would be getting us huge GHG reductions. I've talked about this before. This seems to me almost a slush fund. It's almost as if the administration thinks it can do anything it doggone well wants to with the money and make believe that it is doing something significant for GHG reduction.
A few things in response, Mr. Patterson. California is unique in terms of the generation of GHGs. In many states, in most states, utilities are the biggest emitter. In California, transportation accounts for, I believe it's 48% of emissions. And so that's why there's so much focus on transportation as a recipient of funds. Of the $850 million in the administration's proposal, I think it's 600 is going to transportation, of which high-speed rail is a piece, along with connecting transit and other services. Brian Ennis from the Transportation Agency maybe can fill in on some of that. But I think there's a very strong tie in the importance of addressing the source of where our problems are, which is transportation. And high-speed rail, along with investments in local rail and transit, really creates the opportunity to make real changes in how people travel and where our emissions are occurring and how they do, not just in the near term, but very importantly, post-2020 and over the long run, because the obligation to continue reducing greenhouse gases doesn't end in 2020. It continues beyond, and in the face of a continually growing population. And so we have to do something that really is transformative in order to see the needle move.
Right. Yeah, Brian Annis from the State Transportation Agency, and I think Jeff Morales said it well, but just to speak to the broader cap and trade strategy for transportation, that sector is about 38% of the GHG emissions, and of course through Governor's executive order we're looking to reduce that transportation sector's emissions between 2020 and 2050 by 80% reduction from the 1990 levels. So the strategies there are many, but generally it's to provide some attractive alternatives to personal automobile travel, and we do that in multiple ways in the broader proposal. There's high-speed rail, and as Mr. Morales said, in areas where that does exist, in Europe, Asia, and even northeastern quarter of the United States with the Acela. That is the choice of many travelers. In many cases, over 50% of travelers are using rail services. I think between Washington, D.C. and New York, over 70% of those travelers are using rail. Between Boston and New York, it's, I believe, about 50% are using rail. So even in the United States, where that rail alternative exists, people choose that as the most convenient, cost-effective way to travel. I think later in the agenda we'll also get to talk about some investments we're proposing for urban, commuter, and other intercity rail. And of course, the other components of the transportation sector are the Sustainable Communities Funding proposal to help with more local transit, infill development, active transportation, those types of investments. And finally, at the Air Resource Board, there's funding proposed for cleaner vehicles, from freight vehicles to personal automobiles that might be zero emission or lower emission. So what we're bringing forward with the cap and trade plan is intended to be really a comprehensive proposal to address many needs across the transportation sector and other sectors as well.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate it. Thanks for the effort. I don't think you're answering the question. What are you going to ground the airplanes? Let me talk about choice. All right. Let me just get to the bottom line. Nothing that I've heard here changes the fact that the price tag and the limited GHG reduction pales to insignificance with all of the other potential projects and all of the other methodologies we can use. So we have told the folks that we're charging for their greenhouse gas emissions that we're going to pay the state, what, $1 billion in a year? 850 million? And so they're all over there having to pay for it, and the governor is saying, let's take a third of this, which has been extracted from others, and place it in a reduction that is, I can't use any other word, but puny. I appreciate your effort to help me understand it, but I remain unconvinced. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? All right. We have issue 9. Right. We have one more issue for you, the budget change proposal. And I would point out that on issue 8, the recommendation is to hold open. So we'll do that.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, committee members. Russ Fong, the Chief Financial Officer. Before you today on issue number 8, you have, or 9, excuse me, you have 2 BCPs. BCP number 1 is a request for a PTA loan. This loan will be used to function solely for our administrative budget of about $29 million. BCP number 2 is for Southern California improvements, and it's important to note on this particular BCP is we're not using any state funds, we're just moving federal funds from one area to another. Federal funds that were originally earmarked to purchase the Union Station, LA Union Station, we're now using that funds to enhance the Southern California area and increase our connectivity. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Mr. Gordon?
I would move to approve as budgeted.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Move to a vote.
Bloom?
Aye.
Campos? Aye. Gordon?
Aye.
Patterson?
That passes. And we'll take public comment now.
Hi, I'm Kevin Dayton with President and CEO of Labor Issues Solutions out of Roseville. I wanted to talk about some of the things that are discussed here. First, regarding issue 2, the business plan. As I've mentioned to the High Speed Rail Authority Board before, I found it to be difficult to follow and not very good in organization. Mr. Griffith, you did a great job of turning that into something that's easily readable. I hear that a private organization is soon going to be producing its own business plan that follows the spirit and letter of the law. It's going to be called legacy issues, because ultimately, while it's never said here, legacy issues are your big problem for high-speed rail. I'll note that one of the problems with the business plan, the voters for Proposition A approved a $45 billion high-speed rail system, phases 1 and 2. Now it's a $68 billion blended phase 1 for San Francisco to Los Angeles. This is one of the fundamental issues why the bond money can't be spent. Regarding the speed, even the business plan only says under 3 hours and doesn't say shall be designed to achieve maximum nonstop service travel time for 2 hours 40 minutes from San Francisco to Los Angeles Union Station. I think that to suggest that, oh, it was only designed for 2 hours 40 minutes, we don't actually have to do it, that's not what the voters thought. In fact, the argument in favor of Prop 1A said Prop 1A will save time and money travel from LA to San Francisco in about 2.5 hours for about $50 a person. That's what people voted for in 2008. I think in the business plan it needs to indicate the status of some of the connectivity projects. For example, there's going to be a lot of environmental challenges for some of the activity with the electrification on Caltrain, on the peninsula. We don't see that here. I saw the staff report pointing out some of the flaws of the Hyperloop arguments. One thing that comes up with the Hyperloop is a lot of the assumptions about what technology was going to be used and what route was being taken was done by the Intercity High-Speed Rail Commission from 1994 to 1996, 20 years ago. You're talking about land acquisition costs and the difficulties regarding that. Well, you know, you could always look at the original commission's consideration of the I-5 corridor. They knew that was going to be less expensive and faster, but they rejected that. Maybe it's time to return to that again. Regarding issue 3, I do have a quibble with the staff report that says that the state can't spend the Prop 1A money because of the court challenge. Actually, it's unable to spend the money because the authority isn't complying with Prop 1A. I'll also note that one of those lawsuits is a bond validation lawsuit filed by the High-Speed Rail Authority against all interested people. So that was actually an attempt by the High-Speed Rail Authority to get by future litigation regarding bond spending. I'll also note it's not said here, the California High-Speed Passenger Train Finance Committee, which is a check and balance in Prop 1A, completely failed to say any questions or have any deliberation about the bond sales. I was there for that meeting. Regarding issue 4 and issue 5, what's going on with the heavy maintenance facility and the test track? The environmental impact report for the Merced to Fresno project segment said that that would be the test track. Now the construction packages, contracts 1 through 5, it looks like the rail is going to be built from Madera down to the county line between Tulare and Kern counties. So what happened to that test track? Where's that heavy maintenance facility going to be? Not addressed at all. Issue 5, the cap and trade. I'll give advice to the authority. They produced a report that was given to the legislature, I think it was July 1st, that was supposed to explain how they were going to get the zero net emissions. And that should have been the report where all this stuff was put in. They mentioned vaguely the tree planting. They didn't mention 5,000. I don't know why they're not talking about such things as buying new school buses and irrigation pumps that were put in there. I look at how you're going to use the initial construction segment. Wouldn't using those Charger locomotive engines reduce the greenhouse gases? Basically, this is the authority's failure to try to explain this. Not that they're going to ever be able to show that the cap and trade should be used, but they've completely failed on this particular issue. Regarding ridership, impossible to predict any ridership. I figure that the state can always impose tolls, increase airport fees, increase gas taxes to increase that ridership. So I understand the difficulty the authority has predicting the future. Also, one thing that isn't addressed in the business plan, the job creation, Assemblywoman Campos, you probably know that there's a community benefit agreement, also known as a project labor agreement with the State Building Construction Trades Council. And, if the Trades Council actually follows the letter and spirit of the project labor agreement, the apprentices should be on it. I look at the project labor agreement, though, and I see many loopholes in that, especially in the truth is a lot of the heavy engineering work here is going to be done by workers coming in from out of state. That's just the reality of the situation. So, we can talk about the job creation, but let's look at the reality of construction. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. Mike Robeson here on behalf of Caltrain. Caltrain is generally supportive of the governor's proposal to use cap and trade money for high-speed rail. Just wanted to comment on Mr. Griffith's report is fantastic. It's one of the most educational documents I've read on this in a long time. Just want to point out one thing on it, though. There is the nexus on greenhouse gas emissions and high-speed rail and electrification of Caltrain in particular on page 21. Caltrain's environmental impact report estimates there's 68,000 metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions attributable to their electrification project in 2020 on
Instead of the 18,000.
Instead of 18,000 on an annual basis. So it's there is a nexus, and it's good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Keith Dunn here on behalf of the Association for California High-Speed Trains. I'd like to thank this committee for providing another opportunity for you and the public to talk about high-speed rail. As the previous speaker mentioned, the voters did vote to build a high-speed train. Since that time, we've been working hard collectively as a legislature and as citizens and supporters of the project to make sure we're getting it right. These hearings go a long way to make sure we're doing that. Great collection of information to have and to review. But as this process moves forward, we really are talking about a rail modernization program. This is a program that's going to bring California into the 21st century. It's going to create the types of jobs that the Central Valley has been lacking for centuries. And it's going to be a project that will increase the mobility of our state through the goods movement and also with the ability for passengers to get from point A to point B in a timely fashion. It's not easy. No one ever said it would be, but we have committed individuals who are not only working hard to make sure that we're keeping the commitment of the voters, but also making sure that this body is informed on that progress. And I thank you for the opportunity to let them come and talk about the good work they're doing and for us to continue this process.
Mr. Chair, members, Cesar Diaz on behalf of the State Building and Construction Trades Council, proud supporters of this project for many, many years. I'd like to associate my comments as well with Mr. Dunn's, who's made a very good point about the voters actually taking the vote to approve this very important transformative project. There are a lot of public hearings, accountability measures built into not only what the voters voted on, but also through SB 1029, through hearings such as this, which is very thorough. I'd like to also say appreciation for the analysis, which is very thorough on this. And also to Assemblymember Campos's points about apprenticeship programs. As you know, in Public Works Law of California, there is a requirement to use apprentices, regardless of whether there is a community benefits agreement or a project labor agreement. A project labor agreement takes it a step further and actually encourages hiring from those disadvantaged communities that Mr. Morales had mentioned. That targeted hiring will ensure that not only California workers are building this project, but those that are from the most disadvantaged areas. We know that several regions in California are not experiencing the economic benefits of the rebounding economy. The Central Coast areas and the coastal urban centers have seen a lot of progress in terms of jobs and construction, but the Central Valley has not. We see this as a transformative project for economic prosperity for many people that don't see any other hope in sight. And so they're traveling hundreds and hundreds of miles to find work. This project will bring that work to their doorstep. And we certainly think that thousands and thousands of new apprentices in the Central Valley will benefit from this project. So for those reasons, we strongly support. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members, Sarah Phlox of the California Labor Federation. We have been supportive of this project from the very beginning. We see the high-speed rail as key to economic development and job creation in the state. We've been very pleased to be in hearings since the beginning and to see the evolution of this business plan, and we will participate in the future. And I just wanted to raise the point of what the cost to the state will be if we do not build high-speed rail. Our population is growing. And we're going to have great need for transportation in the state, especially in the growing areas of the Central Valley. That means if we do not build high-speed rail, we're going to need more airports, more plane gates, more miles of highway, and we'll have more commuters stuck in traffic, unable to get to the areas where the jobs are. High-speed rail is a way to alleviate that pressure on our highways and in the air. And it is a smart investment. So we'll continue to support the project and happy to work with the authority and the legislature. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Ted Hart, and I'm here speaking, I guess, partly for the public or maybe all for the public. My background is 60 years in the construction industry. And when I retired, I took a look at high-speed rail, became involved 4 years ago, have attended almost every board meeting, most of the hearings, and have brought myself up to speed over this period of time to say that I think I'm somewhat qualified to be able to talk on the issue. What I'd like to call this committee's attention to is that there was a Transportation Senate Committee hearing Thursday of last week on high-speed rail. At the conclusion of those people that spoke at that particular meeting, my first comment to the committee was that was the most informative bit of information in 4 years where we actually heard what was supposedly going on between all of what's transpired over this long period of time. Those people that spoke at that committee meeting were the Legislative Analyst Office, Lewis Thompson, the High Speed Peer Review, and William Ibbs, the Department of Civil Engineering at UC Berkeley, and Paul Dyson, Rail Passenger Association of California. I would suggest and hope that the papers that were presented at that meeting would be provided to this committee so that you might share in this information, which I consider to be the best that's been there. Moving over into what Mr. Patterson was talking about on the cap and trade, I believe that you may have just received some information on this. Yesterday afternoon, late, we have a 95-page, 4-section informational pamphlet, we'll call that if we want, but it's on available electronically, showing why the use of cap-and-trade revenues to finance high-speed rail is bad. It's a bad idea legally, financially, and scientifically. This paper was prepared by some experts within the field that are looking at this, and I would ask that this information be provided to the committee, which can be sent over electronically. Maybe Mr. Patterson's already seen this, but I feel it is very beneficial because it gives the opposing view as to what's going on here, and we're somewhat lacking in this from the public at this particular time. And I appreciate your time, appreciate all the work the committee is doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is David Cameron. I'm the assistant to the director of the Teamsters Rail Conference in Washington, D.C. We represent 70,000 locomotive engineers and maintenance of way people, as well as 1 million workers throughout the country. We have a strong interest in the success of this project. Facts are stubborn things. We have 28 million people in the state now. We'll have 50 million by 2050. We have 32 million registered vehicles. We'll have 10 million more. On 99 alone, you have 120,000 cars going up and down that highway. And as Al Smith with the Fresno Chamber of Commerce said, you cannot pour concrete fast enough to keep up with the growth. For too long, the Central Valley has been isolated from the economic engines of the South and the North, and the high-speed rail project and the 24 stations along the way will serve as an economic engine for the Central Valley, connecting them with the North and with the South. We strongly approve of this project, and we urge your support as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That appears to close out the public hearing, and I want to thank you all for your participation. This has been a good hearing, and I have to say the more I hear about high-speed rail, the more comfortable I become with the project. It is enormously complicated. We need to continue to communicate about the various issues, not only the ones that we know about, but those that are going to most assuredly arise as the project moves forward. I think for me, the most illuminating part of the hearing was the part where I missed Mr. Ennis, the first part of Mr. Ennis's presentation. But I caught the tail end, and I may not be picking up on what you even intended, but on a very large scale, I think that this project is one of many pieces of the modernization of California's transportation infrastructure. We are lagging far, far behind many other parts of the world in what we are doing transportation-wise, and it's high-speed rail is really only one piece of that. It certainly is an important piece, and this project should only be one piece of what will be a high-speed rail network, not just here in California, but connecting various states and population centers. At the other end of the spectrum, where we're not paying enough attention now, is connections in our local communities, where traffic congestion is choking off economic development. So from one end of the economic spectrum to another, from one end of the transit spectrum to another, we have significant challenges that we need to meet in California if we are to count on economic development in the future. It's not lost on me. I read just this morning there's a report that says that the city of Los Angeles, which is our biggest population center in the state and enormously important to the future of the state, notwithstanding the importance of other areas in our state, but there has been little or no economic growth in the city of Los Angeles for decades, according to this report. That has to change if we're going to move forward, and transportation is probably the single most important thing that will help us get to economic development, the jobs, moving people around the state and locally. And so I commend you for the work that you're doing on this project, and look forward to the conversations that we will have going forward.
Thank you, Mr.
And with that, I thank you, and we'll move on to where are we going now? We've got Caltrans, yes. Issues 10 and 11, rail modernization and the update on gasoline tax revenues. Thanks for your patience, and welcome. We do need to wrap this hearing up by noon, so I think we've got enough time to handle everything, but just want to set out that time constraint for everyone.
Sure. Again, Brian Annis with the Transportation Agency, and I'm joined by Caltrans Director Doherty and Budget Chief Stephen Keck. And happy to talk about the rail modernization program, and we use that term rail modernization broadly. We just, of course, concluded the high-speed rail discussion, and we see that as the high-speed spine that connects all the other commuter, intercity, and urban rail systems. And this proposal is to continue investing in those intercity, urban, and commuter systems as well to serve passengers that are using those systems today for their daily commute, and also facilitate the connectivity to high-speed rail to grow ridership on that system as well. Just in terms of context setting, I did want to mention that the $50 million here of cap and trade isn't the only request we have to the legislature this year in this area. We're also asking the legislature to appropriate the remaining Prop 1B bond funds for transit. The request is for $793 million. We looked through those projects and found about $312 million of that amount is for urban and commuter rail systems. These programs or these projects are already programmed in the 1B program, but there's some BART projects, some light rail projects in Los Angeles, and others that are funded through that. We also have a request to increase funding for Amtrak services. The federal government has reduced their support, and so we have a request there. This specific request, the $50 million of cap and trade funds, we're proposing a new program here that would focus on integration of the existing systems as well as the more traditional capital work that you see to add trains, such as double tracking and other things. The structure we're proposing is to staff the workload at Caltrans, but have a agency role as well. And the reason we're proposing that is the agency currently does coordinate the high-speed rail with Caltrans Intercity Rail, and we're also charged with approving the business plans of the JPAs that run Intercity Rail. Currently, that's just the Capital Corridor service that runs between Sacramento and the Bay Area. But it may be expanding in the future with the legislation passed last year. This, of course, is a cap-and-trade proposal, so I'm happy to talk a little bit about the greenhouse gas benefits. It is similar to high-speed rail, and the benefit to greenhouse gas reduction is largely in that mode shift. We looked at some information that the federal government does. The U.S. Department of Energy puts out something they call the Transportation Energy Data Book, and in that they compare different energy intensities per passenger mile. And so what they do, for example, is they look at the average energy use in a passenger car versus an inner-city rail passenger mile. And they find that when you mode shift and move over a person driving into a rail trip for intercity rail, that reduces the greenhouse gas emissions by about a third. Jeff Morales was talking about some data for high-speed rail. When you go from those diesel locomotives on a traditional intercity down to electrified rail like high-speed rail, it's really an 83% reduction in GHG emissions. So there is some variation there in different reductions depending on what kind of trains you're running. But again, this program, we're proposing to look at integration as a focus, look at things such as ticketing integration. The Bay Area has the Clipper Pass that several systems are using, including Caltrain and BART, and we find these type of systems where they exist do tend to increase rail ridership. It reduces that transaction cost of moving from one system to the other. Los Angeles area has the TAP card that they're trying to expand on. So I think the state in a program such as this can facilitate further integration, and that's one way to grow ridership in these systems, and as well as other investments. I again mentioned the traditional expansion of tracks and things like that to add service. There's also perhaps some measures that can be taken to increase reliability of service, more reliable the service, the more people use it because they know they can get to their destinations on time. So I'm happy to take any questions or turn it over to Director Doherty if he wants to add anything.
Now, there's a request in here. Caltrans Director Malcolm Doherty, as pointed out by Undersecretary Brian Annis, for $50 million in 4 permanent positions in the 14-15 year to support the activities for the rail modernization program.
Thank you. And our staff recommendation on that particular item is to hold open for now. So we'll take that under submission. Issue 11.